station Nexus Prime hung in the void like a mechanical spider, its 8 arms stretching into space with the kind of architectural arrogance that screamed, "We are very important here." The Galactic Military Academy occupied the station's primary hub, where the galaxy's finest warriors came to prove they were, indeed, the galaxy's finest warriors. Admiral Vashi of the Zentaurian Empire strutted through the Academy's main corridor, his 7-foot frame decorated with enough metals to armor a small shuttle. His blue-scaled hide gleamed under the station's harsh lighting, and his 4 eyes swept the area with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong about anything, ever. "Commander Moran." Vashi's voice boomed across the corridor, causing several junior cadets to jump. "Have you reviewed the files on our newest edition?" Commander Moran, a Catherian with the build of a small mountain and the disposition of a landslide, looked up from his datapad. His rocky, granite-like features shifted into what might have been a smile, if mountains could smile. "You mean the human, sir? The one from that backwater planet, what do they call it, Earth?" "The very same." Vashi's chest puffed out with the kind of pride reserved for those about to make a very important point. "I still cannot fathom why the Council approved this experiment. Humans. In our academy. Next they will be admitting houseplants to flight school." Judge Quintara glided over to join the conversation, her Rigelian form moving with the precision of a laser-guided missile. Everything about Quintara was regulation perfect, from her polished exoskeleton to the way she held her data slate at exactly 45 degrees. According to Regulation 847.3-B, all member species of the Galactic Federation are entitled to educational exchange opportunities, Admiral, even the less evolved ones. Less evolved. Moran chuckled, a sound like boulders grinding together. "That is diplomatic, Judge? I heard they still use projectile weapons. Actual bullets. Like they are still throwing rocks at each other." The 3 senior officers shared the kind of laugh that suggested they found themselves incredibly amusing. Around them, the academy buzzed with activity. Centaurian cadets practiced combat forms that looked like deadly ballet, while Catherian students lifted weights that would crush most shuttlecraft. The Rigelians moved in perfect formation, their every step synchronized to the nanosecond. "Speaking of our primitive guest," Vashi said, checking his chronometer with theatrical precision, "she should be arriving any moment now. I do hope someone remembered to bring a stepladder." As if summoned by cosmic irony, the Academy's main entrance hissed open. Through the airlock walked a figure that made the assembled aliens do a double take, then a triple take, then just stare. Amy Kowalski stood 5 feet, 4 inches tall, which in the Galactic Military Academy made her roughly the height of most aliens' kneecaps. Her brown hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail that somehow looked casual despite meeting every military standard. And she wore the standard-issue Academy jumpsuit, which on her looked like it had been tailored by someone who understood that clothes should fit the person wearing them, not the other way around. What really threw the aliens off was her expression. She was not intimidated. She was not overwhelmed. She was not even particularly impressed. Amy Kowalski looked around the Academy's main hall the way someone might survey a new gym, mentally cataloging the equipment and wondering where they kept the good coffee. Is that Moran squinted with all 4 of his eyes? Is that supposed to be a warrior? Perhaps there was a mistake, Quintara whispered, her voice carrying the tone of someone discovering a clerical error. Maybe they sent us a child by accident? Admiral Vashi watched Amy approach the reception desk, where a bewildered Zentaurian clerk was clearly trying to figure out if he needed to kneel down to make eye contact. "Gentlemen and lady, I believe we are about to witness the shortest military career in galactic history." The aliens continued to watch as Amy completed her check-in with the kind of efficiency that suggested she had done this sort of thing before. She answered questions, provided documentation, and signed forms with the fluid motion of someone who understood that paperwork was just another obstacle to navigate. "Look at her," Vashi continued, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that could probably be heard in the next solar system. "So small, so fragile. One good training session and she will be crying for her mother." What none of them noticed, as they continued their commentary on human limitations, was that Amy had excellent hearing. And what they really did not notice was the small smile that flickered across her face as she listened to their predictions about her inevitable failure. The Galactic Military Academy was about to learn something new, whether they wanted to or not. Training began at 0600 hours sharp, because apparently the universe ran on military time, and military time waited for no one, especially not humans who might need a few extra minutes to reach the pull-up bars. Amy found herself assigned to Training Pod 7, alongside what could only be described as the galaxy's collection of overachievers. There was Brandon Torres, a Zentaurian who looked like someone had taken Admiral Vashi and fed him nothing but protein powder for 20 years. His scales gleamed with the kind of health that suggested he had never met a carbohydrate he could not bench press. Then there was Morton, a Catherian whose forearms moved with the coordination of someone who had never dropped anything in his entire life. He was built like a walking geological formation, complete with the kind of confidence that comes from being able to carry your own body weight in each hand. "All right, recruits," barked Drill Sergeant Klaxon, a Regellian whose voice could probably shatter reinforced glass. "Today we start with basic physical assessment. Strength, endurance, coordination. You know, the things that separate warriors from civilians." The strength test involved lifting progressively heavier weights until physics intervened. Brandon Torres stepped up first, cracking his knuckles with a sound like breaking timber. He hefted the starting weight, a modest 50-kilogram bar, like it was made of foam. By the time he was done, he had lifted nearly 400 kilograms, and he was not even breathing hard. "Excellent work, Cadet Torres." Sergeant Klaxon noted the score with obvious approval. "That is what I call Zentaurian strength." Morton approached next, and the show began in earnest. With 4 arms working in perfect synchronization, he lifted weights that would have impressed a construction mech. The bar bent slightly under the load as he pressed nearly 500 kilograms overhead, holding it steady while casually adjusting his grip. "Outstanding, Cadet Morton." Klaxon's voice carried the tone of someone witnessing perfection. 4-armed efficiency at its finest. Then came Amy's turn. She walked to the weight station with the same casual stride she had used entering the academy. She tested the bar, adjusted her grip, and lifted. The weight went up adequately. Not impressively, not embarrassingly, just adequately. She managed 120 kilograms, which was respectable for someone her size, but in this company looked like a warm-up exercise. "Well," Sergeant Klaxon said, his voice carefully neutral, "that was sufficient for a human." The endurance run proved equally educational. The track stretched around the academy's outer ring, and a 5-kilometer circuit with the kind of artificial gravity that made everything feel just a little bit harder than it should. Brandon Torres took off like a launched missile, his long legs eating up distance with mechanical precision. Morton followed, his 4 arms pumping in rhythm while his rocky frame moved with surprising grace. Amy jogged. She maintained a steady pace that looked almost leisurely compared to the alien sprints happening around her. She finished the run in respectable time, but nothing that would make anyone write home about it. Acceptable, was Klaxon's assessment. For someone carrying significantly less body mass. The weapon assembly test revealed more of the same pattern. Alien cadets dismantled and rebuilt plasma rifles with the speed of professionals. 4 hands, it turned out, were better than 2 when it came to handling multiple components simultaneously. Amy completed the exercise correctly, but watching her work was like watching someone solve a puzzle rather than witnessing military precision. "At least she got it right," Klaxon muttered to his assistant. "Though I have seen maintenance droids work faster." Admiral Vashi observed these proceedings from the elevated observation deck, his satisfaction growing with each mediocre human performance. By the 3rd day he had started what he called the human pool, where officers placed bets on exactly when Amy would wash out of the program. "I give her 2 weeks, announced Commander Moran, dropping his credits into the pot. "She will realize this is not a job for weekend warriors." 1 week, countered Judge Quintara with mathematical certainty. "The combat training phase will eliminate her immediately." The other cadets had begun their own form of friendly hazing, the kind that military institutions everywhere seem to consider character building. Brandon Torres started calling Amy Little Warrior in a tone that suggested he found the title adorable rather than accurate. Morden would offer to carry her gear, help her reach high shelves, and generally treat her like a mascot who had wandered into boot camp by mistake. "Hey, Little Warrior," Brandon called out after a particularly challenging obstacle course session. "Need help getting down from there?" He was referring to a 2-meter wall that Amy had scaled without apparent difficulty, but somehow made sound like she was trapped on a mountain peak. "No thanks," Amy replied, dropping down with the kind of controlled landing that suggested she had done this before. "I think I can manage." What none of them noticed, as they continued their subtle condescension, was that Amy was watching everything. She observed how Brandon moved during combat drills, noting his preferred stance and the way he telegraphed his attacks. She watched Morden coordinate his forearms, studying the rhythm and timing that made him so effective with multiple weapons. She memorized Sergeant Klaxon's training routines, learned the preferred techniques taught at the academy, and quietly catalogued every strength and weakness she witnessed. While the aliens focused on demonstrating their superiority, Amy was building a comprehensive database of exactly how this military machine operated. Because Amy Kowalski had not survived growing up in Detroit by being impressed easily, and she certainly had not made it to the Galactic Military Academy by accident. Week 3 arrived with all the subtlety of a meteor impact. General Kraft Nog, the Academy's commanding officer, stood before the assembled cadets like a monument to military intimidation. He was a Draknari, which meant he looked like someone had crossed a dragon with a tank and then given the result anger management issues. The cadets, his voice rumbled through the assembly hall like distant thunder. "The time has come for the Blade Dancer assessment." The collective intake of breath swept through the room. Even the most confident cadets suddenly found the floor incredibly interesting to study. Amy noticed Brandon Torres actually gulp, which for a 7-foot Zentaurian was quite an accomplishment. For those unfamiliar with this tradition, Kraftnog continued, his scarred face splitting into what might have been a smile if smiles were designed to terrify people. The Blade Dancer is the Academy's most prestigious combat evaluation. It separates true warriors from those who merely pretend to be. The general activated a holographic display that showed the assessment chamber. It looked like a circular arena designed by someone who really enjoyed the concept of imminent danger. Multiple blade launchers were positioned around the perimeter, each one capable of firing razor-sharp projectiles at velocities that could probably punch through light armor. "The rules are elegantly simple," Kraftnog explained with the enthusiasm of someone describing their favorite hobby. Participants enter the chamber blindfolded. 12 blades are launched in sequence, increasing in speed and complexity. Your task is to dodge, deflect, or catch each projectile without sustaining injury. Miss one and you fail. Get cut and you fail. Lose your composure and you definitely fail. Judge Quintara raised her hand with mechanical precision. "General, what is the current pass rate for this assessment?" 12%, Kraftnog replied with obvious pride. Over the Academy's 300-year history, only 12% of cadets have successfully completed the Blade Dancer. It remains the ultimate test of warrior reflexes, spatial awareness, and pure combat instinct. The room buzzed with nervous energy. Morden flexed all 4 of his arms simultaneously, probably calculating angles and reaction times. Brandon Torres cracked his neck with a sound like breaking branches, psyching himself up for the challenge ahead. "My forearms will give me a significant advantage," Morden announced to anyone within earshot. "Multiple limbs, multiple interception points. Basic geometry, really." "Zentaurian reflexes are the fastest in the known galaxy," Brandon added, not to be outdone in the bragging department. "Our neural pathways process combat information at nearly twice the speed of most species. This assessment was practically designed for us." Commander Moran leaned over to Admiral Vashi with a grin that suggested he was about to say something he found extremely amusing. "Care to make this interesting, Admiral? I wager 1 month's rations that the human does not last 30 seconds in that chamber." 30 seconds? Vashi chuckled. "Commander, you are being far too generous. I give her 15 seconds before she is curled up in a corner, probably crying. We make it 2 months' rations. Gentlemen, Judge Quintara interjected with the precision of a legal document. Perhaps we should establish a formal betting pool with proper regulations. I suggest categories for time survived, number of blades avoided, and probability of requiring medical attention. The mockery spread through the cadet ranks like a virus. Within hours, Amy had become the subject of an entire underground economy of bets, jokes, and predictions. The aliens seemed to find endless entertainment in discussing exactly how quickly their human classmate would be eliminated. "Hey, little warrior," Brandon Torres called out during lunch, his voice carrying that same patronizing tone that made Amy want to test his reflexes with a food tray. "Maybe you should ask for a modified version? You know, foam blades, slower speeds, training wheels? Or perhaps," Morton added with four-armed smugness, "you could request a demonstration first? Just to see how it is supposed to be done by real warriors?" Amy listened to all of this with the expression of someone watching a mildly interesting documentary. She nodded at appropriate moments, smiled politely at the jokes, and generally gave every impression of someone who knew she was outclassed but was too polite to admit it. What she actually did was approach Quartermaster after evening chow, when the corridors were mostly empty and the betting pools were in full swing. "Excuse me," she said to the grizzled old Catherian who managed the Academy's equipment supplies. "I was wondering if I could reserve some practice time in Training Bay 4. Quartermaster looked up from his inventory pad with the expression of someone who had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him twice. "Practice time? For what, exactly?" "Hand-eye coordination drills," Amy replied with the casual tone of someone requesting extra towels. "Just want to work on a few things before the assessment." The quartermaster shrugged with the universal gesture of someone who had stopped questioning cadet requests years ago. "Bay 4, 2,200 to 0200 hours. Try not to break anything expensive." As Amy walked away, she could hear the continuing commentary from her fellow cadets about her inevitable, spectacular failure. The pressure was building, the mockery was mounting, and everyone seemed absolutely certain about what would happen when she faced the blade dancer. They were about to discover just how wrong confident people could be. Assessment day arrived with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for public executions. The observation deck above the blade dancer chamber was packed tighter than a cargo hold, with every cadet, instructor, and officer in the academy cramming in to witness what they were calling the human experiment. Admiral Vashi had secured a front row seat and was passing around a bag of what looked suspiciously like popcorn. "Gentlemen, ladies, and assorted beings," he announced with the enthusiasm of a sports commentator, "today we witnessed the shortest blade dancer attempt in Academy history." Commander Moran checked his chronometer with theatrical precision. "Current betting pool has her lasting 14 seconds. I think that might be optimistic." The chamber below looked like a mechanical coliseum designed by someone with a doctorate in creative violence. 12 blade launchers surrounded the central circle, each one loaded with gleaming projectiles that caught the light like silver death. The floor bore scorch marks from previous attempts, which really added to the welcoming atmosphere. "First up," announced General Kraftnog over the intercom, "Cadet Zelthron of the Alterian Empire." Zelthron was a classic Alterian, meaning he looked like a praying mantis that had spent serious time at the gym. He stepped into the chamber with the confidence of someone who had been catching flying objects since childhood. The blindfold went on, the chamber sealed, and the assessment began. The first blade launched with a sound like ripping air. Zelthron's head snapped toward it with mechanical precision, his elongated arm deflecting the projectile with casual expertise. The second came from a different angle, deflected. Third, fourth, fifth, all handled with the kind of professional competence that made the observers nod approvingly. Then came blade number 8. Zelthron reached for it, miscalculated the angle by approximately 2 centimeters, and received a shallow cut across his forearm that immediately disqualified him. He left the chamber muttering something in Alterian that probably was not suitable for mixed company. Cadet Morton of Kyther Prime. The four-armed mountain strode into the chamber like he owned it. This was going to be good. Morden had been bragging about his multiple limb advantage for weeks, and the physics seemed to support his confidence. More arms meant more interception points, and more interception points meant higher success probability. The first few blades were child's play. Morden's 4 arms worked in perfect coordination, creating a defensive web that seemed mathematically impossible to penetrate. He caught blade number 4 with his lower left arm while simultaneously deflecting number 5 with his upper right. The observers cheered. This was warrior poetry in motion. Then the system decided to test his coordination. Blades 8 and 9 launched simultaneously from opposite sides. Morden reached for both, his arms crossing in mid-motion, and somehow managed to tangle himself into a knot. He went down like a 4-armed pretzel, and blade number 10 sailed harmlessly over his confused form. "Well," commented Judge Quintero with clinical detachment, "that was educational." Brandon Torres fared better, his Zentaurian reflexes serving him well through the first 10 projectiles. He moved with the fluid grace of someone born to dodge flying objects, his scaled hide gleaming under the chamber lights. Then blade 11 came at him with a spin that created an optical illusion. He reached for where the blade appeared to be, not where it actually was, and received a nick on his shoulder that ended his attempt. "At least he made it to 11, Admiral Vashi observed. "That is respectable by Academy standards." Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Cadet Amy Kowalski of Earth. The observation deck erupted in barely contained laughter. Someone actually started a countdown timer and projected it on the main display. The betting pools were updating in real time, with odds heavily favoring spectacular failure within the first 20 seconds. Amy walked into the chamber with the same casual stride she used for everything else. She was not pumped up, not visibly nervous, not putting on any kind of show. She just looked like someone about to complete a routine task, like taking out the trash or checking her mail. "Look at her," wheezed Commander Moran between chuckles. "She looks like she is going shopping, not facing the blade dancer." The blindfold went on. The chamber sealed. The countdown began. Blade 1 launched from her 3 o'clock position. Amy tilted her head slightly, and the projectile whistled past her ear with millimeters to spare. No dramatic dodge, no flashy deflection, just a minimal movement that got the job done. "Lucky," someone called out from the observation deck. Blade 2 came from behind. Amy stepped to the side with the kind of casual grace that made it look like she had simply decided to admire a different part of the chamber. The blade embedded itself in the wall where she had been standing. "Okay, that was actually pretty good," admitted Brandon Torres, though his tone suggested he was talking about a mildly impressive party trick. Blades 3 and 4 came in rapid succession. Amy swayed between them like she was dancing to music only she could hear, never breaking stride, never showing any sign of strain. The observers started paying closer attention. Then came blade 5. Instead of dodging, instead of deflecting, Amy did something that made every alien in the observation deck question their understanding of physics. She reached out, casual as you please, and caught the spinning projectile out of mid-air. Not with a desperate grab, not with a fumbling snatch, but with the precise, confident motion of someone plucking an apple from a tree. The observation deck went dead silent. Did she just? Admiral Vashi's voice trailed off into confused silence. "That is not possible," Judge Quintero stated with the conviction of someone whose worldview was cracking. "The rotational velocity alone should have." Blade 6 launched. Amy caught it. Blade 7 caught. Blade 8 came spinning end over end with enough force to punch through light armor. Amy snatched it out of the air like it was moving through molasses. The pace increased. Blades 9 and 10 launched simultaneously. Amy's hands moved in a blur, catching both projectiles with movements so fluid they looked choreographed. She was not just succeeding, she was making it look easy. "This is not possible," Commander Moran whispered, his voice carrying the tone of someone watching the laws of physics file for divorce. Blade 11 came at her like a missile. Amy caught it without moving her feet. Blade 12, the final test, launched with twice the normal velocity. Amy reached out with casual confidence and plucked it from the air like she was catching a thrown ball. She stood in the center of the chamber, blindfolded, holding 2 blades in each hand, surrounded by the embedded projectiles that had missed her by calculated margins. Then she removed her blindfold, looked up at the observation deck, and smiled. The silence was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. If anyone had been capable of holding a pin without their hands shaking. The chamber door hissed open, and Amy walked out with the same casual demeanor she had maintained throughout the entire assessment. She set the 4 captured blades on the equipment table with the care of someone returning borrowed tools, but then looked up at the observation deck full of aliens whose jaws were collectively scraping the floor. "So," she said with the tone of someone discussing the weather, "how did I do?" The question broke the spell. Suddenly everyone was talking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of confusion, disbelief, and what sounded suspiciously like existential crisis. "That is impossible." Admiral Vashi sputtered, his 4 eyes blinking in different sequences like a malfunctioning traffic signal. "The rotational velocity. The trajectory calculations. The how?" Commander Moran was staring at his chronometer like it had personally betrayed him. "She lasted the full assessment. She caught them. She caught them all." His voice carried the hollow tone of someone whose betting pool had just collapsed into a financial black hole. Judge Quintara was frantically scrolling through her datapad, probably searching for regulations that could explain what had just happened. There must be some precedent, some documentation of this technique. This level of performance simply does not compute with established species capability matrices. Amy waited patiently for the noise to die down, then shrugged with the universal gesture of someone about to explain something obvious. "You want to know how? It is not really that complicated." General Kraftnog leaned forward, his scarred features intense with curiosity. "Cadet Kowalski, please enlighten us. In 300 years of Academy records, we have never witnessed a performance like that." "Well," Amy began, settling into explanation mode, "humans evolved as persistence hunters. We did not chase down prey with speed or strength. We followed them until they collapsed from exhaustion. That requires incredible hand-eye coordination, spatial awareness, and the ability to predict movement patterns." Brandon Torres was shaking his head like someone trying to dislodge water from his ears. But the catching, the precision. Those blades were spinning at lethal velocity. "Right tool use," Amy continued with the patience of a teacher addressing particularly slow students. "Humans have been throwing and catching objects for survival for about 2 million years. We developed opposable thumbs specifically for manipulating tools. Our brains are literally wired for calculating trajectories." She gestured toward the blade launchers with casual authority. "Plus I grew up in Detroit. My grandmother taught me knife throwing when I was 8 years old. Said it was good for hand-eye coordination and keeping the neighbor kids from stealing our tomatoes." The observation deck processed this information with the enthusiasm of a computer trying to run software it was not designed for. Detroit. Grandmother. Tomato protection. These were not the explanations they had been expecting. "There is more," Amy added with the tone of someone just remembering an amusing detail. "I performed with Ringling Brothers Circus for 3 years after high school. Knife-throwing act. The amazing Amy and her whirling blades of death. We did 2 shows a day, 7 days a week." Admiral Vashi made a sound like a deflating balloon. His entire worldview, carefully constructed over decades of military service, was crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. "Circus," he whispered. "She was in a circus." "So let me understand this," Commander Moran said slowly, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone navigating intellectual quicksand. "You are telling us that human children learn weapon handling from their grandmothers? As recreational activities?" "Well, not all of them," Amy replied reasonably. "Some kids get piano lessons instead." Judge Quintara looked up from her datapad with the expression of someone whose entire legal framework had just been declared obsolete. "I need to completely revise our species capability assessments and probably file approximately 47 incident reports." The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. Commander Moran, true to military tradition, honored his betting losses with the grace of someone whose monthly nutrition had just been redistributed. 1 month's rations, as agreed. He grumbled, though there was something suspiciously like respect creeping into his voice. Admiral Vashi spent the next several hours in what could only be described as apologetic overdrive. Cadet Kowalski, I must express my sincere regrets for any misunderstandings regarding your capabilities. Perhaps we have been somewhat hasty in our assessments of human potential. The word spread through the academy like wildfire. Within hours, Amy had gone from the human experiment to the cadet who made the blade dancer look easy. The betting pools transformed into study groups, with aliens trying to understand how human reflexes worked and whether they could learn similar techniques. General Kraftnog made the announcement at evening assembly. Due to recent developments in assessment methodology, Cadet Kowalski will be serving as assistant instructor for the Blade Dancer program. She will be helping to develop new training techniques and educational approaches. Amy accepted the assignment with the same casual grace she brought to everything else. Happy to help, she said. Though I should probably mention the knife throwing was just a hobby. You should see what I can do with a baseball. The observation deck fell silent again. Somewhere in the distance, someone was probably starting a new betting pool about whatever a baseball was and whether the academy was prepared to handle it. Amy Kowalski smiled. The Galactic Military Academy was turning out to be more interesting than she had expected. And she had a feeling the real education was just getting started. For everyone involved,